Now that you have learned how to create a super simple table and also assign a not null constraint to the table, if you haven't watched my previous videos, please do so. In this video, we're gonna learn how to create a primary key on a table. Keep in mind, let me explain what is primary key. Primary key is defined on a table, and there will be only one primary key per table. The primary key uniquely identifies a record within a table. A primary key cannot contain duplicate values. So any value that present within the primary key is pretty unique. And you cannot store null values in a primary key column, right? So when you create a table, most likely you will be identifying a primary key column within that table. Again, the primary key column or set of columns, it can be one column or set of columns. They will uniquely identify the records within the table. So in this case, gender ID is the column that uniquely identifies the records in the table gender. So there are many ways of creating a primary key on a table. So I'll show you the simple way. So let's say you identify gender ID as the primary key column and followed by the data type, and then followed by a keyword called primary key will identify gender ID as a primary key column. And once you execute this this table statement, create table statement, it creates the table identifying gender ID as the primary key. So henceforth, the gender ID you cannot insert null values in there. You cannot insert duplicate values in there. You can only insert unique values which are not null into this column. So this is one way of creating a primary key. There's another way is you can also create a primary key at the very end of the table right here. So you can go at the very end and put a comma on right next to the last column, and then in here you can add this statement primary key, and then you can provide the column that you want to identify as primary key. In which cases you use this, you add this primary key statement at the very end is, let's say if you have multiple columns as primary keys, let's say there are two columns that you identified as primary keys, which means the combination of values between gender ID and gender short description as a primary key, right? As unique, for example. So in that case, you add a constraint at the very end of your create table statement, and you can add multiple columns. So in this case, I'm only identifying gender ID as a primary key, but you can also add multiple columns here if you want to add gender ID and gender short description. By all means, you can add how much ever columns you want to add to represent a primary key, right? But in this case, for me, the primary key is just gender ID, right? Now, let me show you the best practice. So whenever you add a primary key to a table, make sure you add a name, a constraint name to it, right? That way you can identify the primary key with a dedicated name, right? So for that, add the statement constraint, and then gender underscore pk. So I'm giving a name for the primary key constraint, and that name is gender underscore pk, and I'm adding it as a constraint. So by doing so, in future, if you want to drop or alter these constraint, you can actually refer this constraint name, and it will make things a lot simpler, right? So once again, I showed you 3 different ways of creating a primary key, but the third way is the best practice way. So I always suggest to use this method for creating primary keys on your tables.